Guys are live.
Oh, terrific. Well, good afternoon, all. This is the Board Natural and Cultural Resources Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District on this June 9th, 2021. We're just getting underway around 12:30 in the afternoon. Sabrina, could you please do the roll call of our committee members?
Okay. Director Lane.
Here.
President Rosario.
Here.
And Committee Chair Coffey.
I am present and want to thank President Rosario for attending in Director Waspie's absence. He was unable to attend today. And I've asked Assistant General Manager Christina Kelchner to tell us who on her staff will be present for the meeting and presenting.
Thank you, Director Coffey and members of the committee. Christina Kelchner, AGM of Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. And today we have joining us Chief of Stewardship Matt Grau, IPM Specialist Pam Bites, who will be presenting on the tree die-off item. We have Archives Program Supervisor Brenda Montano, who will be giving us an update on archives. Chief of Planning Brian Holt, and we're very pleased to have our new Cultural Services Coordinator Anna Marie Guerrero, who will be giving a presentation today. And we also have AGM Ocker with us. We have Becky Tuden from the Stewardship Department, Koko Yamamoto assisting, and Tammy Fallon assisting as well, Devin Reef from the Planning Department. And I think that is the roll call for staff. Thank you.
Oh, that's a terrific turnout. I'm looking forward to the meeting. So it's time for our usual Brown Act disclaimer, which I'll provide at this point. Today's board committee meeting is held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order, allowing for board members to participate in standing committee meetings remotely. We are also providing live audio and video streaming and have provided the public the opportunity to email or call in prior to the meeting for public comment purposes. All information regarding participation in this meeting can be found on the agenda on the district website at ebparks.org. After each presentation, we will be taking public comment through the Zoom platform. And Beth or Dee, do you have any questions concerning the meeting and our procedures? No? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and begin the agenda. Our first agenda item is draft resolution to support conservation and education efforts for pollinators, presented by Ecological Services Manager Becky Tuden and Supervising Naturalist Sonia Gomez. Take it away.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Coffey and members of the committee. I'm Becky Tuden, Ecological Services Coordinator in the Stewardship Department, and I will be co-presenting on this topic with Sonia Gomez, Supervising Naturalist from Interpretive and Recreation Services, as well as we will be joined by members of the UC Berkeley's Bee Campus USA. And we're here today to talk about pollinators, which consist of bees, birds, bats, butterflies, and a lot of other insects. And these species are essential for maintaining all of the vegetation on this planet by fostering reproduction and seed distribution. And I'm especially pleased to be here to talk about our efforts, but also because normally I come and talk about harmful owl blooms, and this is a little more fun. So next slide. So just a brief roadmap, an overview of what I'll be talking about today, and what you'll hear about is first and foremost, I want to thank the Bee Campus USA, Taylor Rain and his colleagues for all their work on this issue. Their efforts are the reason that we're here today in front of the committee with a draft resolution for promoting pollinators in the Park District. The Bee Campus advocates were very patient and very persistent in working with Park District staff on promoting this resolution and making it happen. And they will be giving a presentation as well, and I'm sure you will share in their enthusiasm and support for these pollinators. I'm also going to talk about the purpose of the resolution. What is it? Why do we want to do it? And then use this opportunity to talk about our current pollinator-friendly activities that we have going on that support the health and diversity of pollinators, and also talk about interpretive and recreation services, extensive and wonderful education programs that they have related to pollinators. So that's the big picture on what we'll be hearing about today. Next slide. So why are we doing this resolution? And the resolution was distributed ahead of time in the board packet, and it's a draft resolution that staff is recommending that this committee forward on to the full board for adoption. And this resolution is symbolic of our support and appreciation for pollinators, and also to recognize their importance. And it's really more of a reminder to the Park District to be intentional to support for these creatures and take time to acknowledge them. And, you know, we don't often walk around thinking about pollinators, even though we probably should. And it's a good thing because they're working tirelessly, even without this effort or this work on the resolution. But it also has a commitment in this resolution. It means that the Park District would be committed to enhancing pollinator-friendly habitat. And you'll see that we already do a lot of that, but it's just sort of making that more transparent and more public about our commitment, as well as the commitment to educate our public and our visitors about these pollinators. And both of these commitments are something we're already doing, and they are supported in our master plan. So next slide. Oh, here we are. You know, we've been hearing a lot about threats to pollinators. We've heard about the decline in monarch butterfly populations, loss of native bees, and even studies showing that we're seeing significant decline in the diversity and abundance of birds. And there's a number of causes that lead to that. One is if you have non-native or noxious plants, they can create a monoculture. They also can outcompete and disrupt the other native plants, the flora and fauna that those pollinators depend upon. And also loss of habitat. We've become more and more and more urbanized, which means that there's less vegetation, less native vegetation. And another cause of decline is neonicotinoids, which is typically used in agriculture. It's a chemical, and it's been known to be harmful to bees, specifically in pollinators. And also climate change is another big threat because it's disrupted the seasons, and when it's raining and when it's hot and when plants are flowering, and often they can be off kilter with when the pollinators are hatching. So that's another concern that may affect the population. So the good news is that there's things that we can do about that. And I made that what we can do box bigger than the causes, because I'm hoping that we can make a difference on our parklands. In particular, you know, as we look forward into the future, we can see that with this huge Bay Area population and rapid urbanization, that our Park District lands will be the last areas that have these large contiguous habitats that can support these pollinators. So it's important for us to be good stewards in conserving those native habitats, eliminating noxious weeds, using our resources to improve the species diversity in the parks, continue to educate the public about the importance of pollinators so that they can do work in their own gardens and yards. We already banned the use of neonicotinoids in Park District properties, and then continue to promote this interagency scientific and academic partnerships like we're doing today with Bee Campus. So next slide. I'm going to go into a little more detail about the specific projects that we're doing and on a regular basis. And I want to take this opportunity to give kudos and support to Kimberly Crispin. She is in our stewardship department. She's a vegetation ecologist, and she is taking the lead on our monarch butterfly restoration efforts. And she has presented to this committee on that previously. And she is also focusing on sourcing clean and native plants and working with invertebrate research. So I just want to, if we have a lot of detailed questions about invertebrates, I'm going to hand it over to her. So what are we doing? we do a lot of technical assistance and training that actually support pollinators. In particular, we've been working with park staff and pollinator gardens, pollinator-friendly landscaping, and removing of invasive weeds. We've also been doing work on what are the appropriate plants to plant in a specific location, and making sure that those are sourced and they're clean. We're not introducing new pathogens. We've also done things like source local milkweed seeds to support the monarch population. And we more recently have been partnering with the Xerces Society and the RCDs on monarchs, and then also on what types of plants and where we want to put those pollinator plants. Another activity we do, again, we may not directly link it to pollinators, but it does make a huge difference, is grazing. Grazing by disturbing the environment actually increases that landscape diversity and promotes flowering forests. And lastly, we have a large number of restoration efforts ongoing specifically for pollinators. Many of those are focused in the monarch butterfly parks, Coyote Hills, Point Pinole, and Ardenwood, where we're doing breeding habitat enhancement, and we are actually analyzing. We brought in the Xerces Society to analyze overwintering groves and see how we can better manage them. And all across all parks, we're expanding nectar plantings, and we have pollinator gardens. And then we do a lot of bee, bird, and bat houses so that there's a habitat for them. And at this point, I will turn it over to Sonia Gomez to talk about her work with INR, and then we'll hear from Bee Campus USA and come back around, talk to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. So I'm Sonia Gomez, supervising naturalist at Ardenwood Historic Farm, and super excited to share with you just a snippet. This is going to be a tip of the iceberg as far as what interpretive and recreation services staff are already doing in terms of public education around pollinators. So I'll talk a little bit about events, programs, publications, and social media posts that we do. I just want to say, pollinators, they're super charismatic. They're relatively easy to spot in our parks. You can even see them doing their pollinator jobs out there with people when you're in the parks. Create incredible diversity of pollinators. And then they also have this wonderful interpretive message. So I think one reason you'll see we do a lot of interpreting around them is they need our help, but there's also a lot that every person can do to help them. So it is an empowering message when we talk to the public and to the school kids about what they can do to help pollinators. So as far as events, kind of our most obvious one that fits into this, the Butterfly and Bird Festival at Coyote Hills. It's almost 25 years now running. It's a long-term festival. One thing that we've actually been talking about over the past few years, do we add bees in there? Because we do have many bee exhibits and information about bees at the festival as well. In fact, really the purpose of the Butterfly and Bird Festival and what we put out there when promoting it is that it's all about increasing pollinator populations and empowering the visitors that come to the festival to do that alongside us. So again, a lot of solutions, crafts, festivities, puppet shows, all of that, but it's all around promoting pollinators in our landscapes, both in the parks and in people's homes. And you'll see that reaches around 3,000 people annually. So for Coyote Hills, that's a maximum capacity event. Talking about maximum capacity, so the Wildfire Festival at Sunol, reaching over 2,500 people. It was so many people for that small limited parking that they have transitioned that incredibly popular event to the wildflower season. So now they've stretched it over an entire month. And so this year, actually doing a whole month of wildflower season stuff, they reached over 10,000 people with both virtual and in-person programs. So what you're seeing in the photo there with some giveaways in the little brown paper bags are poppy seed balls. So people can throw those out, and really the sub theme. So it's about wildflowers, but they talk a lot about pollinators. They also had one of the other giveaways was a butterfly craft kit. So kids got to make little coffee filter butterflies and talking about the importance of pollinators and wildflowers and how they work together. So strong pollinator sub-theme in that event. And then this year, as Big Break went back to in-person stuff, they wanted to look at what do we do to make this welcoming back of people to the visitor center a positive thing coming out of all the virtual programming we've done. And so for May, they did Pollinator Palooza, and all month it was about pollinators and had quite a few events around that. So they reached around 130 people in person, as well as the virtual audience as well. So again, just a sampling of the events that we do. There are also a lot of ongoing programs in INR that either have pollinators included or are focused on pollinators. So a few of those over at Tilden. How cute is this? So this is a garden chores program, getting the little kiddos out into the garden, and specifically they're looking for pollinators here. So a lot of searching through, talking about how our food relies on pollinators, that important connection between our everyday lives and the pollinators that are out there. They also do insect walks, nature rambles that include pollinators. And then too, we have older kids looking for pollinators as well. And by older kids, I mean, you know, our age, adult kids, well, lots of bio blitzes and citizen science where people are getting out and looking for pollinators as well. Again, that diversity of pollinators is really a wonderful interpretive opportunity to talk about. An example of a virtual program this year. So again, part of that Pollinator Palooza event up at Big Break, they did put together a preschool program, Pollinator Pals. So this is a 40-minute on Zoom program, naturalist Melissa Falks led, and all about, again, why are pollinators important? How are they part of our everyday lives, geared to the little kiddos? So again, a preschool program that was very successful. And then here at Ardenwood Historic Farm, we have, you know, again, with crops and food and talking about what people eat, the importance of pollinators is an important and often talked about theme at Ardenwood. One thing I do want to mention too, though, at Ardenwood is we traditionally have done a lot around the monarchs, and Becky talked about the you know, the groves at Monarchs, the overwintering site, and how important that is to the public there. With the decline, we have had a lot of questions coming from the public. You know, where are the butterflies? What are you going to do for us if there are no butterflies to see? And the staff have been amazing at pivoting those programs to talk both about solutions, but then open it up to a wider array of pollinators. So we're developing new programs around that. And that's the What's the Buzz About Bees is a new program that's kind of filled some of those the monarch program spots. All right, publications. We also give stuff away or have signs out for people to read. So this is a picture of the Wayside panel at the Pollinator Garden, or the Native Plant Garden at Crown Beach. Crab Cove staff put this together. And we have lots of similar panels around the district. There are multiple pollinator gardens, such as the Nectar Garden at Coyote Hills. You know, Ardenwood has a few dedicated pollinator gardens, as well as at Little Farms. So these signs are kind of spattered throughout our interpretive regions in the district. We have brochures. I apologize, this is an old brochure, but is one that is currently getting updated. So we'll have a new look and feel very soon. But it's really about what plants and people put in their own gardens, whether it's a windowsill garden or a yard, to attract different butterfly pollinators, and both looking at the host plants for caterpillars as well as the adults. And I should mention on the brochures too, again, it's just an example. So we also have native garden brochures, common wildflower brochures that talk about pollinators. And then this was Ardenwood, so I was just really proud of it. We've had Interpretive and Recreation have rather enjoyed this opportunity with our regional and nature publication. It's often a long list of all our wonderful programs in the parks. With this kind of pivoting over the last year, we've included a lot more interpretive content and gotten really great reaction from the public on that. So this is an article that went out in one of those publications, specifically about native bees. And one reason too I wanted to share this is you can see the bee house here. And we've had a couple bee houses, native bee houses around the district. And then the Bee Campus USA have been gracious in giving us a few more bee houses. So we'll be installing more of them in our interpretive parks as well, which is very exciting. All right, and then lastly, as we've gone digital, we've had an opportunity to reach even more people in different ways. And I did just a quick search over the last 12 months. We've quickly compiled 12 pollinator posts. So at least one a month that's going out specifically on pollinators. I'm sure there are more out there, but wanted to give a few examples of what those look like. So here's Sonal, part of the virtual wildfire season, talking specifically about pollinators in their Friday film. Another one, so this is an interactive, so some of our digital stuff are interactive programs as well. If anyone has had the opportunity to play a Kahoots with the staff, I think they're really fun. Online trivia games, you got the device, you're voting on things. They did one all around pollinators this year. At Ardenwood, again, we're taking the opportunity with the monarch decline, but all the attention and the questions we get around that to show how people can help all pollinators. Del Val has a native garden area where they specifically talk about pollinators and wildflower season. Did some posting on that. Here's naturalist Michael Chernovsky over at Crab Cove in their native plant garden. Again, doing a live program about pollinators. Coyote Hills has their whole nectar garden, so definitely are on board with this. And then saved the best for last. This is my final finale here. Don't know if we have any Sir Mix-a-Lot fans out there, but this was the favorite one I found was we like bee butts and we cannot lie. So people are getting creative with how we talk about pollinators. But again, this shows just a quick search. I found lots of social media posts. I can say we reach a lot of people through social media. So this message is definitely getting out there in this way. And then lastly, just a little, I know there are lots of words here, but kind of a sneak preview on that resolution, some of the verbiage that's included in that, while it's fresh in your mind what interpretive and recreation are already doing, I just want to point out that this really aligns with what we're doing now. So it's exciting to kind of be able to formalize our commitment to this, but it's really not a stretch. So, the event materials that we put out, the programming and website resources are all definitely within our capacity and our interest. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to the kind folks with Bee Campus USA and to Taylor Rain.
Okay. Let me know if you can see my screen. I'm going to start my screen share shortly. Does it look good?
Yes, looks fine. Taylor,
Excellent.
why don't you introduce yourself and your colleague?
Excellent. Well, thank you all for having me today. I am Taylor. I'm a representative from UC Berkeley with the student group CalPERC students. I'm a fourth-year environmental science helping lead the Bee Campus USA initiative. And I have some of my peers and colleagues here today who I'd like to have them introduce themselves to.
Hi, Martin here. I'm a sophomore now, also with the Bee Campus, and I'm really excited to be here in support of the Pollinator Resolution.
And Pete, if you'd like to unmute yourself too, to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Hey, how's everybody doing? I don't look like I can share my screen for some reason, but anyway, I am the executive director at the Essig Museum, UC Berkeley's research insect collection, and I'm helping to advise Taylor and the gang on the Bee Campus project. So I'm happy to answer any questions about insects generally. Thanks.
And so we're probably going to resonate some of the same information that Becky and Sonia just gave, but hopefully in a new and inspirational way. Martin's going to talk a little bit about pollinators again in general, and then I'm going to go through some of our experience as a student organization and some of the tools and techniques that might be able to be used by the Parks District.
Hi, so as many of us well know, we are in the middle of the Anthropocene mass extinction event, and that's hitting our pollinators especially hard. The Western monarch butterfly population, I believe was mentioned earlier, is now less than 3,000 in the Western US. There are 1,600 bee species in California, many of which are endangered and facing extinction, and are also being outcompeted by invasive pollinators. So this causes a cascade effect or a cycle of extinction. When we have a loss of habitat, use of chemicals that kill off our native pollinators, this in turn kills off our native plants who require those native pollinators to survive. In turn, the death of those native plants further encourages the death of those native pollinators. So it's definitely a downward cycle towards the end of our native ecosystems.
But I know that's doom and gloom, but some of our goals are to help increase the abundance of native plant and pollinator species, eliminate the use of these dangerous pesticides statewide, and also encourage the restoration, education, and service learning opportunities, not only in Berkeley, but in the greater East Bay District.
So we work mostly on our own campus, although we do sometimes partner, for instance, what we're doing here with citywide organizations. On our campus, we've rehabilitated our campus gardens to increase their native plant usage, and we've installed native bee houses, and we've held lots of teaching sessions with elementary and middle schoolers.
And some of the successful strategies that really work, and some of the tools and resources that may be useful for making this pollinator resolution come to fruition, because we've been talking about how it's symbolic, but that there are also actionable items, and the East Bay Parks has done quite a bit for encouraging education and publications. But for instance, we've used email lists in the city of Berkeley, whether those are gardening clubs or city council email lists. We send out a Google form, and this Google form lists off the potential gardens that residents and community members could adopt. And it's a very easy way for us to distribute information in mass and get a sign-up sheet. And that Google form can translate over to a Google Sheet. Another very important matter is incentives. You know, we all need incentives to do work. We're not going to do work or volunteer unless we have a strong motivation to protect bees. So recruiting students from a university or a school as part of a class or a program where they could earn units may be a really good outlet to help get that labor that you need for these restoration or gardening events, and even the workshops that could be offered. For instance, our class here, there are 3 students in the photo on the left from our decal, which is a student-led course at Berkeley that's offered for 2 units and allows students to earn credits for helping on our campus gardens.
So we're here in support of the Pollinator Resolution for the East Bay Parks because we hope it will solidify and intensify our switch to diverse native plants in our parks, which will in turn support our native pollinators. Again, stopping that cycle of extinction that's happening. It also promotes pollinator education, which of course we do a lot of work with elementary schoolers and the like. And it was mentioned before the adding bees to the Bird and Butterfly Festival, and we would really like to see that too.
And of course, there are numerous benefits to passing this resolution, as mentioned by Sonia and Becky. It builds visibility, builds the reputation of East Bay Parks, and promotes their mission statement. And I don't think I need to show you, but we have collected almost a dozen letters of support from community members and faculty and staff to urge the East Bay Board of Supervisors to adopt this resolution. But real quick, I would like to have Pete share a little bit of his story with his experience on our campus, and even some of his strategies for how he's been able to recruit students to help in our pollinator conservation work, what's gone well, and maybe just a few of his ups and downs on his project for a minute or two.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, so the slide that we have up right now is a space that used to be a lawn, and during the drought, was it about 8 or 9 years ago now, was pulled up and wood chips were put down. And there's lots of these spaces all over campus, and so we've turned this into a native plant garden to focus on pollinators. One of the great advantages we have at the university is an abundance of students with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, folks like Taylor and Martin, who have come out and actually done the groundwork to get this project done. I think some of the things that are most important thinking about pollinator conservation is, knowing what's out there. And so I think some of these programs and BioBlitzes and things like that are great. And that does help to see the butterflies and bumblebees, some of the big conspicuous things, but a lot of pollinators are really tiny. Some of our smallest bees are just a couple of millimeters. You probably wouldn't even think of them as bees. And so I think the more eyes out there looking at things, the better. And so the university would really, and especially the Essig Museum, which I'm representing, would really like to get more involved with East Bay Parks to be able to provide that kind of information of what is actually out there and help with the education. But in my experience, what it really takes is the grassroots development, those folks with the boots on the ground who like getting outside, seeing things, making observations, and talking to people. I think that's the key to it all. And as I say, at the university, that's easy for us to do. I know there's a lot of people that visit the parks. I'm a regular park visitor and member myself and like to go hiking. And so, getting those folks turned on, I think the programs that we saw presented today is a great way to do that. Getting the kids involved, getting them out there early. Kids are sponges. They love this stuff. So I think, everything that you've heard today is exactly right in my mind. It sounds like we're all on the same page. I don't think there's anybody on this call that would like to get rid of pollinators. Anybody want to raise their hand and say, hey, let's get rid of the pollinators? I don't think so. So I think we're all on the same page, and at the university we've got a lot of resources in terms of the science and the research collection for doing identifications that we're really willing to put behind this as well. Yeah, so here's again some pictures from our garden that's in the early stages of development. We've got some monarch caterpillars feeding on some of our plants and various other native plants. And a key to our development of the garden is not to just have big conspicuous sunflower type things, but have flowers of all kinds of sizes, different shapes, different depth of the corolla. Some are shallow, some are deep. And it's really important for the diversity of pollinators that we have to have a real diversity of flower types out there and colors and all that.
Okay, I think that's all I've had prepared for our part of this presentation. So I appreciate all your time here to listen to us.
Thank you. And if you, yeah, go ahead, and I'm going to bounce it back over to you, Becky. I'll share my screen here.
Thank you, Taylor and Martin and Peter. Appreciate that. So next slide. Looking forward, we're recommending to the committee that the committee forward this pollinator resolution to the full board for adoption. And just so you know, we will be continuing these academic and research partnerships and projects. We'll be continuing the pollinator habitat restoration projects, interpretive and education programs. And we are also actively looking at using community science to start documenting this invertebrate and pollinator activity as a next step. And that next slide, that's all we have. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was fascinating and encouraging. I have a question for Peter real quick. Do you, Peter, work with Professor Satsui?
Yes, I do. So yeah, Neil is one of the professors in our department, and we work closely together on several projects.
Yeah, I was recognizing the view behind you because I think Neil gave me a tour of that museum.
Right.
A couple of years ago. We may have run into each other there.
Yeah, I was here during that tour. That's right.
Yeah, it was an interesting room to observe, to say the least. And thank you. Thank you.
You bet. Yeah, that's our insect mausoleum. It's kind of a strange place to visit.
Yeah, he showed me some of the really strange exhibits there.
Absolutely.
It was interesting. So say hello to Neil for us when you see him. He's on our park advisory committee.
Right. Yeah, I will do that.
So Director Rosario, Director Lane, any questions or comments? Dee.
Sure, I'll go. I just wanted to thank everyone for all this work. Taylor and his associates first approached me to bring this forward, and I just wanted to thank all the work that went into getting this resolution together, and for everyone's diligent work and patience as this went through. I think, in my mind, I think this is a great way to focus on all of our pollinators, as we are, as was mentioned, that we are seeing a tremendous, we're in a tremendous cycle of extinction, and the more we can do, the better. And I'm just very appreciative of the effort that went into this, and so I had to congratulate everyone on the outcome here. So hopefully we'll see a lot more opportunities. I really especially see there's lots of opportunities for volunteers in the Park District, other than, because we have our weed warriors that remove invasive species, but if they also have a dual focus of actually doing some restoration work, that's even better. Another reward and better for the environment. So thank you all very much appreciated.
Director Lane?
Yes, well, Dee's been talking bees for a while here, if I'm not mistaken. And I think what has been very interesting, if you go into garden shops to purchase plants and you ask for plants that will, native plants or plants that are good for pollinators, they always have a lot of suggestions. And I'm not sure whether that was true a while ago, but to your point about looking for a variety of plants, not just, well, let's get the right milkweed. Those opportunities are really out there. So thank you very much for this. It was interesting. And well, I think we'd have a hard time opposing this resolution, wouldn't we? So
That's a great idea.
I definitely think we should pass it on to the board. So thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. It's a great idea. Dee?
If I might say also that if Taylor could say hello to his aunt and uncle, Dennis and Allison Rain, both former employees of the Park District. Dennis was our former fire chief, and Allison was the supervisor at Wildcat Canyon. So please say hi to them, Taylor. And it's good to see that you're doing good.
Now that name was familiar, right?
Well, we're always looking for ways to give back to the community and hopefully the East Bay Parks. So continue to look forward to that.
Great.
I have a couple of questions, a couple of notes. Becky, you highlighted on an early slide some of, you don't have to bring it up, but under programs, parks, where particular programs were being undertaken. I think you listed 5 basically shoreline area parks like Point Pinole all the way down to Arden. I wondered why those parks were being highlighted. I got the sense from the rest of the presentation that these programs are going on throughout the park system.
That's correct. They are going on throughout the district. Certainly removal of non-natives and clean planting and grazing. Those are those coastal parks are where we're looking at for monarch, the Western monarch recovery,
Okay.
where we're doing. So we've done a lot more focused work there, specifically on the monarch, and in particular analyzing the groves because they overwinter there primarily in the eucalyptus forests. So that's why those were highlighted. But you're correct. It's done throughout the park district.
Sure. No, then that makes sense. That's monarch habitat that those
Correct.
parks are focused on. What is the Zursky Society?
So it's a nonprofit. It's a sort of a research arm for invertebrates, essentially. I actually don't really know much more than that. Does someone want to add to that? Thank you, Peter.
Yes, it's a conservation organization like some of the others you might know, but it's focused specifically on invertebrates, and it's actually formed right here in California in the Bay Area. A number of professors at Berkeley noticed some of these declines early on in some of the endangered species we have in California. So they put out a 4 times a year publication called Wings, and they have funding for students to do research. And but bigger than all of that, and probably most important for this group, is they're the ones who sponsor this Bee Campus and Bee City initiative. So that's their program that we've signed into. And they have just tons of resources on their website about data sets and decline and articles and just, just loads of information about invertebrate conservation, focusing largely on butterflies and bees, but all kinds of insects. So that's their purview.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Rosario.
Yeah, I just have one question regarding bees. In my neighborhood, we've seen a noticeable decline in European honeybees, but on the flip side, we're seeing more of the native bumblebees. So is that obviously the reduction in numbers in European honeybees is of concern? Is that something? Well, I don't know what my question is, other than what's causing the decline.
I can jump in here if nobody else has that.
Sure, please.
Thanks. And yeah, so the European honeybee certainly has been in decline. It's mostly been the managed populations that, they go to sleep in an apple orchard in California, and then they wake up somewhere in Michigan the next day, and they go through a lot of stress. There's diseases, all kinds of things. And the colony collapse disorder, which has been blamed for this, it's still not clear exactly what that causes. There are some diseases, there are some other issues. There's mites that get on them. But the backyard beekeepers haven't had as much of a problem. So the bees are still around, and I don't think you'll find any shortage of honeybees if you have a lavender plant growing in your yard. So yes, they are in trouble as well, but that's not something that we're as concerned about. That's more of the agricultural sector is looking at that more closely than we are. But certainly I've noticed as well, the big yellow-faced bumblebee, Bombus vosnesenskii, is probably the one you're mostly seeing right now. It's got the yellow face and a one stripe around its butt. Yeah, they're doing very well, but there are a lot of bumblebee species in California, and several of them are listed as threatened. And so I think that's another good reason for this movement right now is they need continuous habitat. And I think that's something the East Bay Parks offers in a great way, is having that connectivity between habitats. So not just the parks themselves, but being the connection to all these other habitats. Because for some of these bees going through the urban neighborhoods, there's just not resources for them. And so having the connectivity of the parks is really essential.
Great, thank you.
I have a last question, and for whoever can field it. Is this an acute issue, the decline of pollinators, for, let me define the region, for the East Bay, for the Bay Area, for Northern California, or Western states? How do we view that?
Yeah, my understanding is it's worldwide. It's
Right.
not just limited to this area at all, although the monarchs, the Western population does overwinter here. And we've seen, as was discussed, dramatic decline this past year. So it's unfortunately, and again, I always defer to UC Berkeley professors, but there's not as much data on invertebrates as on a lot of other species. They're harder to determine what species they are, and it's just probably not as exciting as other species. So I don't know what long-term data sets we have. Maybe you can fill that in.
Yeah, that's really the big challenge, is having these long-term data sets. So, the museum, we have 100 years of collecting back here, and so we can look at previous distributions. But really, the data weren't collected, or the specimens weren't collected with that question in mind, to look at population trends over time. And so that's been the biggest deficit we have in terms of understanding the problems, is having those long-term data sets. But now with things like iNaturalist and some of these other bioblitzes and programs that people are doing, we're getting a better handle on how populations are responding to climate change and things like that. But that is the problem, is we don't have the long-term data. And I lost my thought there, but I think that point was made. Oh yeah, I was just going to say also, yeah, so the main culprits are the ones we've already talked about. So lots of land, lots of habitat. The neonicotinoid pesticides, those have been a huge problem for bees. Bees tend to be especially sensitive to chemicals, but just the resources, and then invasive species as well, just having that competition and outcompeting the plants that those insects need as well. So those are the big three: the invasive species, the pesticides, and the loss of habitat.
Okay, thank you. Before we move toward a vote on the resolution, I want to give a chance for any public comment we might have. I know we didn't have any previous requests, but Sabrina, do you see anyone raising their hand or wanting to otherwise hear?
There are no public comments for this item, Director Coffey.
All right, well then I want to ask for a motion to approve the recommendation to the full board that this resolution be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
And Sabrina, would you take a roll?
Yes. Director Rosario,
Aye.
Director Lane,
Aye.
Committee Chair Coffey.
Aye. So I really, in particular, want to thank Martin and Taylor and Peter for all that they're doing and attending our meeting today. It is part of what I always observe and appreciate, the long historic partnership the Park District has had with UC Berkeley since the inception of this district 86 years ago. So again, thank you. We'll move to our second agenda item, introduction to new cultural services coordinator, for a presentation by Chief of Planning, Trails, and GIS, Brian Holt.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you all again. Good afternoon, committee. Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails, and GIS. I'm here today to introduce, just real quickly, Anna Marie Guerrero, background herself, and just touch a bit on her work plan moving forward. Anna Marie in April, so still very much work plan. And she replaces Dr. Beverly Ortiz, who was the inaugural cultural services coordinator, and served in that position for quite some time until retiring in October 2019. And then the position was transferred over to the planning department. So we welcome Anna Marie, and I'm going to hand it over to her to go ahead. Thank you very much.
Great, there you go. Thank you so much, Brian, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. And everybody can see that okay? Good? Awesome, thank you so much. So I want to, first of all, say thank you to the board for having me. I'm very, happy to be here to introduce myself to you today. Of course, my name is Anna Marie Leon Guerrero, and I am the new Cultural Services Coordinator. So just a little bit about me first. I got my bachelor's in English and Anthropology from UC Berkeley in 2002. And after that, I completed the Cabrillo College Archaeological Technology program in Aptos in 2007. And on our left here, we see our field photograph at the San Francisco Presidio, a fun little tradition that we do. And in 2011, I earned my master's in cultural resources from Sonoma State University. So the program at Sonoma State University provides students with real-world training in how to conduct in-depth historical research to develop historical context statements, develop and implement archaeological research design plans, data collection and analysis, create and maintain good relationships with descendant communities, and including and especially tribal communities, and how to work within local and regulatory contexts, local and federal regulatory contexts. So Sonoma State also really encouraged outside internships with agencies, which is partly how I ended up doing 2 internships with the East Bay Regional Park District as a grad student in 2009 and 2010 through the operations department. As part of this internship, I led survey crews through Morgan Territory Regional Preserve, and that sort of evolved into my master's thesis, which was a cultural resources management plan for that park. Once I graduated from Sonoma State, I got a job as a consultant with a private company, and for about 8.5 years or so. During my tenure as a consultant, I was privileged to have a wide range of experiences. I've worked throughout California and have had some out-of-state opportunities as well. I was the co-field director for a large-scale historic period cemetery. I have recorded company work camps associated with the construction of Hetch Hetchy. I've conducted and coordinated post-fire monitoring and survey efforts for the Valley Fire, for Woolsey, and the Camp Fires as a FEMA contractor. I've recorded submerged ships in the San Francisco Bay, like it shows there in the lower right-hand corner. And I have some background in geoarchaeology. But my experience is not only limited to data gathering, I've also written or contributed to environmental impact reports and to Section 106 documents as well. And all of that brings me here today. I started as the new Cultural Services Coordinator in mid-April, taking over for Dr. Beverly Ortiz, whom I've actually known since I started my career in archaeology. And of course, this position was established in 2013, and Bev was the first person to hold this position, which was once in operations and of course is now in planning. And I was lucky enough to spend some time with Bev over the past couple of months since I've started to do a little bit of a handover. So 2 of my job responsibilities that I want to talk with you about today are in regards to the cultural resources inventory and Native American tribal consultation. And I want to just briefly present to you a couple of the projects that I'm just really starting to work on. And these include the Wildfire Hazard Reduction and Resource Management Project. Fire is often on everybody's mind, and especially this year as we enter into a drought year. And I'm also starting to work on a cultural resources management plan for the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan. There you go. So cultural resources inventory. Why do we have one and why is it important? Well, it's important to identify what we have in our district park lands. And it's also part of our 2013 district master plan policies to have such an inventory. And of course, like this type of inventory will never be exhaustive. It's meant to be a dynamic inventory. It's never going to be complete. And that's for a couple of reasons here. There are always going to be tribal cultural resources that we're going to be identifying, as we work more with tribes and, they tell us what places and what resources are important to them. We could have buried resources that we don't know about that aren't revealed until we do some type of ground disturbance. And as historic period resources reach that 50-year threshold, we're going to start taking those resources into account as well. So, but keeping just an inventory isn't just supposed to be some static list. Identification is just the first step. You know, we can use it to know where resources are so we can avoid them, whether it's, you know, project avoidance or having the public avoid, you know, more sensitive resources. But we can also, you know, more effectively like manage these resources with that type of list. And one really important way to really effectively and efficiently manage our resources within our park district land is to actually partner with the Northwest Information Center. So the Northwest Information Center is the official state repository for cultural resources records and studies for Alameda and Contra Costa counties. So that would cover park district lands. And the Northwest Information Center, of course, is part of the California Historical Resources Information System. So there are a number of information centers, you know, throughout California that house this type of confidential information. And other researchers and other agencies look to this repository when they're doing, you know, regulatory projects or doing research. So it's important for us to be in partnership with this agency as well. One of my other responsibilities that I've already started to touch on here is Native American tribal consultation. And here at the district, we might do that in or out of a regulatory context. But regardless of a regulatory context or not, I think that using this definition here is really helpful when talking to descendant communities, to all descendant communities. But consultation really is about having a meaningful discussion with people about, you know, what their values are and why certain things are important to them. So we do tribal consultation here, partly because it's outlined in our 2013 district master plan. So it is one of our policies. And we also do it as part of a regulatory context. So CEQA does, you know, require that we examine impacts to tribal cultural resources. And how do we find out about, you know, whether or not we have tribal cultural resources? One way is to ask, and we find that out through AB 52 consultation. So luckily, I do have, because I've worked in the Bay Area for so long, I do have some pre-existing relationships with some tribes out there. And the other project that I'm just starting to work on is, of course, the wildfire hazard project. And so, as we know, like fuel management, you know, especially everybody understands, you know, the dangers of wildfire, especially after the past couple of years. So it is really important, you know, fuel management is really important. And at the district, you know, we recognize that. And we recognize that, you know, because there's such an emphasis on, you know, biological resources, that cultural might take a back seat to this. And so as part of one of our mitigation measures, we actually very smartly like recognized this and said, hey, this might be a problem. We also need to take into consideration, you know, what the effects of implementing this project will be on to cultural. And so as part of that, you know, as part of our mitigation measure here, Cultural 3, we've said that, you know what, to mitigate that possibility, we are going to figure out how to involve cultural resources staff in this process so that they can have input and figure out, you know, how to identify and treat, you know, cultural resources as part of this project. So I'm just starting to figure out how we're going to, you know, implement this. How are we going to do this? So cultural doesn't take, you know, isn't secondary to biological. And all at the same time, remembering that, you know, fuel management is very important. It's a big health and safety issue, of course. So, you know, how can we all work together to meet this goal? And I'm also just starting to work on the Cultural Resources Management Plan. That is a mitigation measure for part of the 2006 EIR. So I'm just starting to develop a scope of work and to work with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy to figure out, you know, what should go into this cultural resources management plan, and what that's going to look like. So that's just started to, you know, step into this a little bit. And there you go. That is all I have for you now, for my 2.5 months into this, I think. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Brian, do you have anything to add?
I've got nothing further to add. I just want to say thank you to Anna Marie. She's been a great addition to the team already. And as I think you can see, a lot of exciting projects moving forward in terms of how the district addresses cultural resources management.
Christina?
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Brian said. I've had the opportunity to work with Anna Marie in the few weeks that she's been here, and she's just terrific to work with. She has so much experience and knowledge and enthusiasm for the work that we're just really pleased to have her on board. And I know the board members are all going to enjoy working with her as well.
You know, I thought it was going to be very difficult to fill the shoes of Bev Ortiz, but you found someone who is incredibly well qualified. That resume, Anna Marie, is wonderful, terrific, and perfect for what you're doing here. I'm very happy we can attract that kind of talent. Any comments or questions on Anna Marie's presentation, Director Lane?
Yeah, I really appreciate, you know, finally meeting you and hearing about these responsibilities and projects, which are just 4 of your list, I'm sure, because there is plenty to be done in this category. And, you know, just over a year ago, we had an archives study done within the Park District, and there were a lot of the recommendations there that I hope we'll have a chance to talk about in greater detail. When the district finally talked about getting someone formally who focused on cultural resources, staff told me that, you know, because I would say, well, we're natural and cultural resources, and look how many people we have working for stewardship. And why don't we have at least one person with a focus on cultural resources? And he said, well, you know, it took us several decades to get to that many people working on natural resources. And so I thought, well, then we just have to keep remembering the cultural resources, because the ability to talk about our history at all levels and all peoples goes across the entire district. And sometimes people just will focus on their own visitor center or on their particular park, particularly if there's someone who stays there a long time. And so I really appreciate your coming on board and having had some experience with us already. And having talked to Beverly Ortiz, you know, there are a lot of challenges to what you're going to be doing. But I'm very glad to have you here. And I think in particular, it'll be very helpful with our tribal consultations. And I want to thank Brian and Devin for their work in that regard, with regard to our new Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. And I hope to see a new day in our relationships with the tribal representatives. So thank you very much.
Director Rosario?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that I totally agree with both my colleagues on the board. I think we are very, very lucky to have someone with your breadth of knowledge and experience. And just from your initial presentation, I think you're going to be fabulous. You do have a lot on your plate, but I just wanted to say welcome to the family. And like I said, we are very, very happy to have you. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Anna Marie, I have one quick question from your presentation that just intrigued me. You were speaking of the Northwest Information Center of the state of California and its archives, and you referred to confidential cultural resources. And I wonder what would be confidential in a historic context.
So archaeological site records are confidential. So they're exempt from FOIA. So they shouldn't be publicly circulated. So the Northwest Information Center houses, archaeological data, which is restricted, and built environment data, which is not as restricted. Does that answer the question? Yeah,
well, I understand that. And
yeah.
Archaeological records of Native American sites and such, you are sensitive and you want them to be free from public inspection. I get that. Okay, so just I'll warn you, you have a board of directors, Anna Marie, led by Director Lane, that are really, really into what you do. And Bev Ortiz would echo that. So we'll have a lot of interaction. Thank you. Director Lane?
Yeah, I guess I'd be remiss in not saying something that I have been talking about a little bit this year, and that is that I think the Park District can do much better in writing about our prehistoric peoples. And so I've been fairly quiet about thinking things were not written the way they should be. But I've decided I'm not going to be so quiet anymore. And so I'll just send you copies of my comments on some of these things. For me, it's so important for people to understand that the people who were here before the Spanish started writing about them were fully human beings. And that you don't need a new vocabulary to talk about them. And sometimes I see such awkward things written that it does drive me up the wall. So I'll share those with you, and you just take them for what they are. I just have had too many times when I read something, not necessarily from the Park District, but sometimes where I feel like the balance and understanding is just not there. Okay, be quiet, Beverly. I'm quiet.
So there you go. I warned you.
We very much appreciate for the mention it, but just to reiterate, Anna Marie's position, the Cultural Services Coordinator, is now within the ASD department and within the Planning, Trails, and GIS department. Anna Marie does report Devin Reef, Principal Planner, so feel free to coordinate through Anna Marie and Devin as we move forward in this new phase for the positions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So before moving on to our next agenda item, Sabrina, are there any indications of public comment?
There is no public comment for this item.
All right. So thank you. Let's move on to the third agenda item, Archives Program Update, Review of Oral History Candidates for 2021. Brenda Montano.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello, Committee Chair Coffey and President Rosario. Glad you can join us, and Director Lane, of course. I really appreciated hearing about Anna Marie, and welcome Anna Marie. I'm really happy she's here. We've also met, and we tend to talk a lot. And it's really great to have somebody to kind of understands a little bit more about some of our issues here at the Park District, but to just talk archives, it's really refreshing, and I'm really glad that she's here and we can work together. Hopefully mine is pretty short and sweet, but I'm going to start to share screen. Okay. So I am going to do a review of the oral histories that we are still working on for this year. We're trying to work on changing up our contract with UC Berkeley. Right now, they have us contracting with them in the middle of the year, and it's just been difficult to track what oral histories are done per year when we're at kind of like middle of the year. So, but I've met with the contractors with UC Berkeley, the Bancroft Library, and they are going to try to do as up to what we would have contracted for this year, the 12 oral histories by the end of December. So that is great news. And that way, come 2022, we can just keep going with a new list of 12 candidates. So I'm going to start, let's see here. Again, we have three separate parts of when we do oral histories formally. And of course, we've been contracting with Laura McCreary, who has successfully completed Bob Doyle's interview this year. And it's incredibly thick, about 700 pages long. And then, of course, Tracy Parent, who was our formal supervising naturalist at Black Diamond Mines for many years. And of course, I always attribute her as being the start of the archives for the district in general there at Black Diamond Mines. And we still practice a lot of what she had started then. And so she's also working on some candidates this year and finishing them. And then, of course, there's the Bancroft Library and working with the Oral History Center there. And just a reminder that we contract with the Oral History Center right now for $40,000 a year. And then Tracy's 10, and then Laura McCreary's a little bit more expensive. However, her oral histories are a little bit more expansive and take a little bit longer. So that is why that cost is a little bit higher. And she's also, I'm hoping to receive the first set of the video only interviews that should be coming. And I know Whitney Dotson's in that, our former board director, Whitney Dotson's in that, as well as our former general manager, Pat O'Brien, and a few others that were interviewed about 5 or 6 years ago. And this I had showed last year about like where we were at with what I could generally find of our oral histories that are completed. We have a lot that are kind of like in transition, and we're trying to follow up on that. And we also have a master list that I'm hoping by the end of this year, we will actually have something to share and a database that could be researchable. We're kind of in the middle, and I'm working with a contractor whose name is Crystal Jimenez. She was also a temporary assistant at Black Diamond Mines for about 6 years with Tracy Parent. So she's knows a lot about what's going on with the oral histories. And I'm really glad that we can still retain her services to support completing a database that's going to be for our oral histories. So my boss, the AGM of Public Affairs, Carol Johnson, suggested that I might change the map a little bit and show it by ward. So this even helped me to kind of see in regions where our oral histories right now are kind of living and to what capacity. So and we could see that there's some areas that are really kind of missing, and some wards that are little covered. For example, Director Corbett's ward. And then as I go forward on talking about these lists of candidates, I decided to break them up into 3 different themes. And one is the land and cultural history. So these would be folks that may have had some association with the land itself. And and then advocacy and governance, which is a new section, not necessarily new for the district, of course, because we've always interviewed people that have had something to do with either government affairs or with the agency's developments that are outside of the district. And then, of course, the district legacy, which includes histories that are associated with the particular park's operations and other agency development over the years. And there are 30 names, actually 31 names that I'll be presenting on here. And how this works is more fluid than actually just coming up with a limited 12 people list. So that way, the Oral History Center can select people that are available now and get them going, and then continue to pursue up to those 12 oral history candidates. So I decided to start with the land and cultural history, and here's a map of Director Lane's and Director Coffey's wards. So kind of like this, what is that, Northeast region. And we have a list of folks that were recommended by the planning department mostly, and some that just happened to pop up, and those are the names listed to the left. I'm excited about all of them, of course, but Charles Messina, who I've recently had a conversation with, might be one of our first to kind of talk about the Carquinez Strait area and his family history connected with a brick factory that used to be there off of George Miller Trail. And later this year, I am hoping to partner with National Park Service as well as with our Black Diamond Mines naturalist staff in doing a StoryCorps sort of format of interviewing some folks that are involved with the town of Port Chicago or have history with the Port Chicago. I've heard of Willie Mims, and I got to meet him last committee meeting. And Brian Wilson is another name that I've heard mentioned that we might be able to invite there, but there might be others. And there could be a chance to collect more names for including in our oral history program. And then I wanted to mention that Tracy is also working on 3 oral histories this year. Betty Maffei, Lee Iacona, and Jack Loffer, who's actually, we've interviewed him, but this is regarding George Hutchinson, who's also part of that area, Black Diamond. And then moving on down south near Director Wieskamp's and Director Waspie's and Director Corbett's wards. We have a few here. This is new this year, is Damien Chenard. And there's also his mother, who are part of the winery that's out at Pleasanton Ridge. This is a new name. We have not asked him yet. That's why the asterisk is there, and we'll start talking with him. He is part of a new property at out near Pleasanton, out near Garin, and then Russ Piazza, and that's Sonol. And I'm excited because he knows some history about Camp Bertha. And then in President Rosario's ward and Director Eccles' ward, I've only have one right now, but this one also came up this year. I'm just trying to remember because this year is kind of foggy, but Tamia Marge was involved with collecting a lot of the cultural history around the Claremont Canyon area. And I was asked recently about if we had any history on the Gilston property. And as I was asking around, of course, our archives volunteers who are, very knowledgeable about who might be around to talk about that. They came up with Tamia, who has done extensive interviews with some of the families that were living in near the Gilston property in Claremont Canyon. So I'd be very excited to to see if we can collect some history from that part of the region still. And then on to advocacy and governance. Again, I'm really trying to work with government affairs who've been extraordinarily helpful in providing names and recommendations on how to reach out to these folks. And of course, we've already spoken with Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris, who are on board for doing interviews this year. And we will be working on reaching out to George Miller. The other names here were recommended, and we will may work on reaching out to them this year or maybe next year. But they are definitely folks that sound interesting to get interviewed. And then this, moving on to district legacy, this is something that I thought about because Doug McConnell has been part of my career, my 18-year career here, working with him on a lot of programs and interviews and events and you name it. And he's also been a part of our family since 1982. So he's been working with the district for that long, almost 40 years. He has, I found this article, and here he actually says that one of his memories was walking with way back former general manager William Pittmont Jr. in Briones. And I thought, wow, that's great. That he has those recollections and has gone back to the district that far, as well as he did extensive interviews with Richard Trudeau, another former general manager. We have a series of videos and interviews that he did for that. So I kind of call this documenting the documentarian at this point. And of course, he has a vast experience documenting the entire East Bay region. And we will know that at some point the Park District will have quite an extensive repository, whether linked with however he is going to, donate his archives, which I'll be asking him what he will be doing with those. But at some point, we have a vast range of history documented with him. And then these are some of the others, and I tried to match it with the ward map and maybe covering some of the areas that we'd love to have more history, at least in the oral histories. And we've engaged with Bill Nichols. And of course, the last presentation that I gave to the committee about the Dunn family, Annette Dunn says she'd be happy to be interviewed. And I think that will be a nice add. And I know she knows a lot about the family. And we've had some conversations at Brian Shiroyama and Martin Snap, possibly. These two folks are carrying on the tradition of the 442nd Memorial Ceremony in Roberts. Lawson Sakai sadly has passed away. He passed away in 2019. No, in 2020. And then Clark Wallace is a new name. President Rosario had suggested him, and I called him. And we've somehow along the way, we lost interviewing Jeff Wilson, and we felt that possibly he could be added to the oral history list of potentials. And then also Mark Taylor, I sort of added him. I'm not quite sure if he will be interviewed this year, but we'll have to talk with him. And then lastly, this is an extended list of suggestions for oral history candidates. We've actually already engaged with Carlene Bruins, and we're waiting to find the right time for her to be interviewed. And the rest are folks that I've been engaging with in the past year and finding out that they have a vast and extensive knowledge, not only of their experience here at the Park District, but also in relationship to the region and how they grew up here. So those were some of the suggestions. And I wanted to kind of present that. And then I also, on my next slide is just something I kind of added because recently when Judge John Sutter, our former board director, had passed away, I was a video company had reached out to me, a local video company, who said, "Hey, we have this old video of Judge John Sutter that was done back in 2007, and they had not sent it along to us, or we weren't sure what happened to the videos end up. But they sent it to us, and I thought it was very touching and timely. And I just wanted to share what he had said about the founding. This would have been when he was talking about San Leandro Bay Regional Shoreline, which is now Martin Luther King Jr. Regional Shoreline. Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry. Also, we're working on 2 oral histories as well this year to finish them. Randy Parent is posthumously, and this was something that Tracy had put together. He was our helicopter pilot for many years for the Park District, and also Larry Olson, and he was our first chief of public safety. Okay, here's John Sutter.
To have some reflections, some instruction for future advocates on what works and what doesn't work, as you know, your experience as a conservationist over many years.
Well, I think what works is tenacity and persistence. You can't just you can't just do it as a sort of short-term issue. A lot of issues go on for years. Developing this park here at San Leandro Bay was an effort that went on for about 10 years, from the beginning of agitating about it to the time finally the resolutions were passed that calling for the development of the park. And that's true of many of these campaigns, that they go on for a long time. So you have to keep at it, and you have to keep at it even though it gets kind of tiresome after a while. You have to have organization. You have to have other organizations, a variety of organizations that are interested. They may not be large organizations, and often they're just a handful of people, but they can make a difference. So I believe that government does bend more than people think. A lot of people have the idea, I don't vote because it doesn't make any difference. But it does. It's not just voting, but going to council meetings and talking to elected officials and sending in letters and all that. Those things do make a difference. So I kind of believe in our system, and I believe that you have to work the system, and you have to work the system effectively. There are some things that are counterproductive. One thing that's counterproductive is name calling, taking on people personally, being inaccurate about facts and information. So you stick to the facts and persevere.
That's a great place to stop.
So to fall upon something like that, especially if I'm working at my desk late hours or just trying to get something done, and to hear those words, it's really powerful, and to me it really touched me when I did hear that, and that's part of. I just wanted to kind of show that why interviewing and doing this type of recording and oral histories are so valuable and important, and collecting people's stories and their history. It's our history. So part of presenting this is to request from the committee members if there are any recommendations or suggestions or changes as part of you all being part of the advisory group for these types of things. So that's the end of my presentation. And I'll stop share.
Thank you very much, Brenda. It's very informative. I took a couple of notes, but let me go to my colleagues first. Director Rosario, comments, questions?
Yeah, Brenda, it's really nice to see that you've really developed a plan of action, and you're following through it. It's wonderful to have you there and starting from the beginning and being able to develop a plan of action. It's great, and I think the results speak for themselves. And as far as that last video with John is that was John, and I think the interviewer, her voice, I think that's Jocelyn Riel.
Yes. Yeah. I surmised that too. Yes.
Yeah. She had a distinctive voice. I wish we could do more than a 12 year. Maybe we'll, is it a capacity issue or is it money? Or both?
It's money. We get money from the Public Affairs Department's funds, most of it, which is $25,000, and then we receive money from the Planning Department, and that's $15,000. So from both of those departments, we have $40,000 now. The Oral History Center also gives us kind of a deal, and that was worked out with former Cultural Services Coordinator, Dr. Bev Ortiz, which was they discount our price a little bit by taking off some of the administrative costs. And so we're not paying $5,000 in oral history. We're paying about $3,500 per oral history. And but yes, it's definitely a budget. We've never really asked for more money yet. There used to be more, but yeah, they do have the capacity to do more if we ask them to.
Yeah.
They would actually probably I think they might add another oral historian to the project. They only have one right now that does ours.
That's good to hear. I mean, I think Beverly and I would probably agree that you need more money. We're both into the history, especially of the Park District. Yeah, something to bring up at mid-year regarding our board contingency money. So yes, I think that should be something in the discussion. So thank you very much. I think I just love the work that you've been doing, and I'm glad to see how it's organized and planned. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director Lane?
I'd certainly second D on that. I'm happy to see the kind of organization you've put together on it. And I do want to say it's been impressive as we've added some of these large ranch lands and managed to get, like Susan and Bowden did some of these interviews as well. She has the ability to get the ranchers to talk to her about it. I guess she was a ranch girl herself, and very, very interesting oral histories. And it's a difficult thing to do, to actually finish it. I know one of the things Tracy Parent's doing now is, backing up to try and complete some of these, and that's really difficult. The time to do it is right after you've done the oral history, and not after someone else has done it either. So I do have one person for the Burrell property that I think I mentioned to you, and I don't know whether I gave you her information or not, but she kind of grew up on it, and she's not one of the older guys that we managed to talk to who are now gone. But she would have a very different perspective on it, being a Saramone girl growing up with her father being fire district chief and Armand Burrell being on his board. So there's some interesting perspectives there. I'll share that with you again.
Thank you very much. I remember our conversation, Director Lane, and I was like, I know she'd said, but maybe this will, the presentation will help remind her.
Yeah.
But yes, I would love to
I'll send
add that person.
information,
Thank you.
to you. And there's nothing like hearing people's stories. And when you talk about history, people may glaze over a little about history, but when you talk about let's tell some stories, people light up and they want to know those stories. And having somebody like John say, well, persistence counts is, it's so true. And the other thing he said was, it helps if you live a long time. Remember, I don't know whether he said it in that interview, but he certainly said it someplace else, because indeed, a lot of these things take a long time. And for us as board members, I think what we need to do is push. So, because there are so many fabulous projects that we have a chance to offer to the public in the parks. So thank you so much. I'm glad you're working on this, and I'm glad you and Anna Marie are communicating on some of these things as well, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brenda, early in your slide presentation, you displayed a map of the district which highlighted areas that have been covered or are being covered by oral histories. Could you describe to me again what that was representing? Were they, was it oral histories that have been taken to date? Was it oral histories to be taken? I was a little unclear on what you were meaning to display that map.
Do you want me to show it again, or
sure,
are you
it's not difficult.
Here, share. This one. Oops. I guess I didn't stop sharing. Yeah. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. So, yes. So this is not an exact science. This is me digging around and seeing what exactly has been completed. Now, there are some oral histories that are in transition, or they're still continue to being worked on. They're not releasable to the public. But these are this is more of what we have that could be available for the public to actually read. And at some point, when we do have the new website, I'm hoping something like this could be accessible. So I did kind of like a little graphic to show like where the majority of the oral histories are being done or have been done, and how some of the areas are a little bit more limited. And so, yeah, and really it's about finalized transcripts. So we could have, oh, go ahead.
So this is about topics. So when you're highlighting, for instance, the Black Diamond area, it has a large highlight circle.
Yes,
more than 30. And so those are oral histories where the topic has been the Black Diamond area?
Correct. Or that the interviewee had information or history related to that particular land.
Okay, so there's, for instance, just let me pick one out. There's no indication of any histories involving Martina Shoreline.
Correct.
So that tells me, for instance, probably we don't have an oral history from Ted Radke.
Oh, we do. Oh, I'm sorry, but some of those are more district legacy. So yeah, so you're right. So there are some that didn't make this list because this is only the cultural history stories. But yeah, so there are some that aren't on this map.
Okay, so that answers
Oh, good.
source
Okay.
of my confusion, because I thought we would have Ted, and Ted would cover Martinez Shoreline. Is there, I've seen it, so I know it exists. So to help us come up with ideas, might share the master list with us again in that map we were just looking at. And by having the master list in that map, it will focus me on, well, where can we get more, where can we find someone to talk about the Martinez Shoreline? You know, a name that comes to mind is Seth Adams. Have we done an interview with Seth Adams?
We have not. However, the Bancroft Library just completed one with him, and it should be available now if you go to their
I'll look for
their
it. But
database.
of course, you know, that would be about the history of conservation in Mount Diablo. But in Seth's other life, he's been very much involved in Martinez. And he tells me stories all the time about how this piece of land got added to the Martinez Hills. And he knows all those stories as best. So we might
Yes.
want to look at that.
Yeah, so I think some of what you were talking about is that there are some people that have been interviewed previously, but some haven't had specific interviews related just to park district history. So yes, that's when we can go back and add folks like that. And
So seeing the master list, seeing that map would help me, you know, think, well, there's not enough here on the Martinez Shoreline, and there's a heck of a lot of history there, and who might be valuable in terms of, so someone like Seth, this is an example of how I would come up with a name like that. So if you could share that with us again. I'm sorry, I don't know if I kept a copy of the master list, probably somewhere. One other note that I made is Port Chicago. Just FYI, there is a small Facebook page where people with family ties to the old town of Port Chicago chat once in a while. And it may be a source of names of people who actually grew up there and are still around. And that just occurred to me as a resource.
Great, thank you.
Otherwise, it was a very good presentation, very informative, and I appreciate it. Anything else from the committee for Brenda? Again, you're going to find, or you already know that you have a board of directors that's really into what you do, as well as Anna Marie. I don't believe we have any requests for public comment.
Yeah, we do not.
All right, so thank you, Brenda. Let's move on to the fourth and final agenda item, an update on the tree die-off in the regional parks. Pam Bates. Pam?
Thank you, Chair Coffey and Directors Rosario and Lane. Bear with me while I share my screen. So today I'll talk to you about the tree back in the Bay Area. I know that I've spoken to many of you on many different occasions in the last few months about this. So some of you will have gotten some parts of the story and others may have gotten others. So I just want to apologize initially about the some of the redundancy. My attempt today is to give you a nice overview of this very dynamic event that continues to unfold. Today, I'll go into how it kind of all rolled out for us, some of the current science that we know, some of our efforts at mapping actual fuel reductions, and then I'll take any questions that you might have. So the timeline, sometime back in November, remember that? It was just a few months ago, literally. We had reports of big acacia dieback. And U.S. Forest Service pathologists reached out to us to say, hey, are you seeing the same thing? So we sent out an announcement to district staff, and they came back to us with an amount of information, and that was that there was more than acacia dying off, that there were big swaths of browning eucalyptus, coyote brush, bay trees, pines, etc. So Out in the field, both stewardship staff and fire staff did some quick on-the-ground reconnaissance, and we found indeed lots of browning and what appeared to be dead coyote brush, eucalyptus, bay trees, and pines. We were able to find some insects involved, and others we were able to cankers. Fire did an aerial survey, and we were able to get an idea of just how widespread it was within the district and also just the greater East Bay area. And so we found that we had multiple species affected, over almost 1,000 at that point when we did rough mapping, almost 1,000 acres of visible tree discoloration in large enough areas that you could see it. So in February 2021, the Garbalota lab initiated a study on the acacia, which was had first been reported. And they really rolled out all of their bells and whistles and really hit the ground running and put together a very robust study across the area, 5 different sites from the peninsula to up north and across East Bay, to identify if there were indeed a specific pathogen or pathogens other than just environmental conditions. And then also the Garbalota lab in a study on the eucalyptus, which was of greater concern to us because that's some of the larger extent of plant communities that have been affected by the buyback. Result, we've got now some science that gives an idea of what kind of best management practices or prevention techniques we can put into place to mitigate the spread of any disease or any other impacts. So I'll go without much further ado. The visual is a fabulous map that was put together to kind of a broader view. East Bay Hill probably have the greatest extent of impact, but it's widespread from north all the way down south to the hills, moving east through Garin into the bay trees up in the beautiful rock hills of Morgan territory. Researchers and scientists agree. We've had a lot of meetings, both in the field and on Zoom. A lot of folks are working on this. From the feds to the states, they all agree, driven, because we've got so many different species across so many different gradients. So it's certainly we're in the throes of drought now, but we did have a couple of good rain years. So I would like to remind you that prior to those couple of good rain years, we still had a big drought and we lost a lot of groundwater sources. So it takes a long time. You can withdraw a lot more from the ground than you can put back in the same amount of time, right? It's just like you're saving. It's a lot easier to spend than to build back up those savings. And so we're still very much at a deficit, as I'm sure you've been hearing as you watch the news. So we are still in a drought. However, those couple of wet years gave pest species like fungi and insects opportunity to really take advantage of stress plants and vegetation. So now what we know for sure is that of secondary agents, we have a lot of beetle attack in our Monterey pine and knobcone pines. We have a number of organisms attacking and causing stress on the eucalyptus, including stem and leaf fungi, galling wasps, etc. Coyote brush, we were able to find stem and tip galling flies. California Bay laurel, still yet unknown, but we do have some colleagues that survivability plots out, so we'll see how well they resprout from this stress. And then acacia, while there are up to 60 different fungal associates with the acacia that were sampled, 2 of them have been implicated in their particular demise. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But there are other environmental factors, right? Most of these species that are affected are non-native, including the acacia, the Monterey pine, cypress, eucalyptus, and they were all planted in many areas that many did not have forests in the first place. Many of them were planted in vegetation form, high density, and we also have urbanization and the fire suppression. So maintenance of those forests have all created a very unhealthy and stressful growing environment. So add on to that things like change that is kind of the for us here. Recall that most of these species, with the exception of the pines, they're aggressive stump sprout. So that's a key to what we can imagine the future like for some of these plant communities. Some of these individual trees, as a result, we have some level of recovery, right? Already we're starting to see resprouting at different parts of the tree. But in order to continue to be vigilant and mitigate these hazards, best management practices or prevention techniques to mitigate the spread of some of the potential secondary. So what's going on with the acacia? Garbalodo lab results on the acacia study really interesting. As a result of that regional sampling, as I mentioned, across a big wide gradient, they isolated a dozen different fungal associates, but only 2 were consistently found at all sites. So that's the proverbial smoking gun. They were most likely involved. Now, in order to test that for sure, the Garbalodo lab has initiated an inoculation study. We don't have yet the results of that inoculation study, but they have finished all of their work and they'll be working up the data. So hopefully the next time we talk, we'll have a more definitive answer. But these fungi are very interesting and they're the basis for which we have recommendations at this point. They have a global distribution. We consider them naturalized, maybe even native fungi. What we've known from these fungi previously is that they were mostly isolated on native species and known to just hang out, to be endophytes living on. Now we have a better idea of their very complex life history, and it turns out they have a variety of lifestyles. They live on the plants. They will then go inside the plants and become genic, and then eventually, once the plant dies, they will then sporulate on the dead material, causing decomposition. So they can go through the full gamut. So one of the things public staff to do is to let us know when you see dead, dying vegetation. A pretty good idea of where most of it is now, but we expect it to continue to kind of roll out. And you can use which this is a picture of the Locator smartphone app, and it gives you a picture of the vegetation. It automatically prints PS location, the time and the date. So it's kind of handy. And you can always send that to us. We'll compile all of that. We're disseminating the ideas about BMP. Specifically with the acacia, we ask if they have dead and dying acacia to remove that material and haul it off to green waste because of the sporulation to increase on that material and then spread to other vegetation. If there's any kind of acacia movement, we ask staff to please contact IPM before doing any of that vegetation management. Of course, this may also have associated hazardous trees. So I won't go into details of the acacia BMPs. I'll also say that other very important plant communities have been, this is the Mount Diablo. The Garbalodo lab was also very quick to get on the ground and sample the manzanitas that you see on the left side of your screen and also the pine in the middle to see what was happening there. So again, drought stress for sure, but also a secondary pathogen called Neophusococcum australe. That's the only one of those that I'm going to be able to say correctly today. And as you can see, the map on the lower right, it is also a distribution. So eucalyptus, everybody wants to know about eucalyptus. We've got a eucalyptus, and you can see from this aerial photo, we have a lot of discolored foliage in our eucalyptus forest here at Anthony Chabot. 4 sites were sampled all the way up in the very north of Keena Strait, which also correlated with the acacia sample. And then somewhere down in the middle, you'll see there's a Tilden site. And then moving further south to Anthony Chabot. Those are our 3 district sites. And then they also sampled Albany Hill. We had a lot of support from park staff and also fire during this, and also other stewardship staff doing nesting bird surveys in order to get the sampling done quickly. So what this looks like on the ground is, this is a eucalyptus round, a little sample where they took leaf, stem, root, soil, also actual rounds samples, and then they take that back to the lab. They pull some of that material out, and then they put it in an agar dish, and they put it in perfect conditions, and they try to grow it so they can actually identify it and then do the DNA sequencing. We do know now, we don't have any species at this point. We do know that, which is our largest cover of eucalyptus species, are experiencing a large amount of stem and foliage. And in some cases, whole trunk die off. But what we are starting to see is some recovery after the first few months. We do have some epicormic sprouting happening along the trunk and even in some of the branches. We'll have results about the specific species that they identify in a couple of months. And this is what it looks like right now, both during the sampling and also you can see, for instance, on the left side was at Tilden, you can see a lot of dead branches, a lot of dead leaves. That's all fuel, either when it falls to the ground or if it stays on the tree, can constitute ladder fuels bringing fire up into the canopy. And then on the right, that's in Anthony Chabot. You can see many of the trees are starting to sprout green leaves from the trunk. According to some of the experts that we've been with from the feds, the eucalyptus are expected to have some amount of recovery. They look terrible, but not entirely dead. But really, we're still waiting because we have another 5 to 6 months of no rain. So still, jury's still out on that one. Again, just a close-up of some of that epicormic sprouting that tells us that many of the trees are starting to recover, but we're recovering through probably the most stressful part of the year. And this also is another concern because that green fuel constitutes ladder fuels that can bring, should it occur, up into the canopy. So what's next for us in the dieback situation? It's very dynamic. As I've mentioned several times, recommendations will change. So we get the best science we can, and we have recommendations, and when we know more, we then will alter and modify as needed. The fire department has begun some dead and dying pine removal from Redwood Park. They've also applied for grants from state and federal agencies to fund more priority tree and fuel removal. We have begun a coordination group, and that will be hosted at the California Oak Mortality Task Force website. It's www.suddenoakdeath.org. There is currently not a tab yet, but that will eventually be the host for all things Bay Area dieback, including any type of lessons learned, latest science, research needs, etc., best management practices, so that we can share between agencies and around the Bay Area. And the acacia inoculation study results, and of course, to sampling results. And then we'll continue to spread the good word of best management practices and prevention, and moving as little material as possible around. So we want to import as little as possible and export as little as possible as we do all of this critical fuel work. So I'm afraid I wish I had more cool, interesting science to give you, but I can promise you that I will have it maybe next time we talk. So if there's questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them. Oh, it sounds like my audio is not so great.
Well, we heard you, Pam. You were cutting
Okay,
out
good. I'm sorry.
once in a while, but I don't know, maybe
It's just been a whirlwind difficulties today.
or bad internet connection, or maybe you want to try audio only in those circumstances. But thank you for the presentation. This is real difficult. I think the other part of this story is that the district is actively seeking funding from both federal and state sources for dealing with the die-off and supporting efforts to bring down truly dead trees. So I know there's a lot of effort currently getting into state and federal funding sources, which is good. And on both levels, there appears to be some funding out there. So hopefully we're successful in that. Christina, did you have something you wanted to add, or?
I was just going to echo that important point, Director Coffey. That is right. That, as you know, board members and staff have been meeting with our delegates and with CAL FIRE and with FEMA to seek all sources of funding for that. And we are hopeful that some funding will come through for this really challenging and large-scale problem.
Thank you. Director Lane, comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a question. You were talking about we are removing dying pines in redwood, and I assume that's in a polygon they were going to address anyway, and as are a lot of these. So are we not addressing eucalyptus because we're not sure that they're dead, or why are we not removing eucalyptus right now? Or maybe we are.
Well, certainly we do continue to prioritize tree removal in our recommended treatment areas along the wildland urban interface. That work continues, but the added fuel buildup is the focus of many of these grant opportunities. We were able to, the fire department, as I understand it, was able to jump on using their own regular funds. They were able to work on the Eastridge Monterey Pines because they already had some environmental compliance in place and they had funding associated. So, and they had very, very, very large trees coming down. So there's certainly an element of safety as well as fire in that. But yes, eucalyptus will continue to be a focus of healthy forests and our healthy forest actions and selective tree removal so that we can have a healthier shaded fuel break in those areas. Did that answer your question, Director Lane?
Well, we've been looking for more funds, as Colin mentioned, to help us get rid of these huge swaths of dead trees. I mean, that's a tremendous number of trees in all of these parks on 1,000 acres. It's just unbelievable. And it's so frightening. Look at the wind. Look at the wind out my window right now. Things are drying as you look. So,
yes,
I appreciate your sharing this with us, and people are addressing the reasons for it. That the sooner we can get rid of this dead vegetation, the better for us. So thank you, Pamela.
Absolutely. I know the fire department is working hard to prioritize areas in order to keep the East Bay communities and our parks as safe as possible for that eventual fire.
Yeah.
Director Rosario?
Yeah, thank you for this presentation, Pamela. Well done. My question is, as we're taking down these dead trees and we're creating these piles, do we have to wait a season like we normally do to burn those piles, or can we burn them as soon as possible?
Well, burning would be specific to the acacia. The most economic efficient method would be to pile and burn. But unfortunately, we're coming up against the end of our burn season. Yeah. We also don't have the capacity, should park staff be able to amass all of that material, we don't really have the capacity to burn all those piles.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one difficulty. And we also recommend that at least movement of materials happens during the dry season so as to minimize the movement of many different types of pathogens. So the ideal is to, if you have the capacity to do the pile burning, that you cut with very clean equipment, you cut everything, pile it all during the dry season, and as soon as the wet season comes and you have the ability, you burn.
Okay, great, thank you. Very interesting, thank you so much.
Okay, well, Sabrina, I understand we have one public comment on this agenda item.
Yes, are you ready?
Yes, please.
Dear EBRPD committee members, the current tree die-off is not only a disaster for our parks, but for the majority of people living in the district. The increased risk of major fire fueled by the dead and dying trees and vegetation is very real, given the dry conditions. The loss of homes and businesses from a fire at a time when we already have a housing shortage and recovering from the pandemic would be devastating. Park District must address this now and take action to both remove dead tree debris and treat those that can survive. The state monies that are being budgeted for wildfire prevention and suppression must be directed to EBRPD. Can your committee recommend to the full board an aggressive approach to securing funding for developing a new fuels reduction plan and emergency removals this year? Time cannot be wasted on studying a problem that is already here. I am personally concerned about the trees that are already down in Tilden and Wildcat where I live. Thank you for your attention to this issue. Gail Feldman, Kensington. And that is all of the public comment.
Okay, so we have a couple of items to get through before closing the meeting. And first, it entails whether there are requests for public comments not on this agenda.
There are no other further public comments, and there are no people. I can make one last announcement for anybody in the room. Everyone in the room appears to be staff only.
All right, so let's close the meeting. Board comments before we close? I have one. Director Lane, Rosario, none? No closing comments or questions? I have a question for Matt Grau, if Matt's still here. So Matt, any new sightings of Cocoa Bear since Sunday?
I don't believe so. I think Doug's email, I believe, was the latest. Well, I think it was cited in Brentwood, I heard. So I know it was
Sunday morning at Discovery Bay. There's some good footage out there. But Monday, Tuesday, now Wednesday, I just wondered if we heard anything new, where Cocoa Bear is ending up.
Not sure. I mean, I think I know they're still looking for him. It's still, I mean, being tracked by CDFW, but I haven't heard anything more than being spotted at Discovery Bay was the last. I think
I just find it absolutely amazing that the state figures that this bear crossed both the Sacramento and San Joaquin River to get to Oakley. Yeah,
it traveled quite the distance, but often wondering if it's drought related in that area, lack of forage, and maybe there's lack of and it's somewhat young. I mean, but we don't know the exact age, so it may be just looking for a new territory and then just got adventurous. So I don't know. Other than that, it seems to be exhibiting normal behavior though. So I think when they've observed it, they're not necessarily doing surveillance concerned with public safety. It's just out of curiosity at this point because it hasn't exhibited any abnormal behavior. It's just in an odd location. Well, I had one constituent ask whether the park district's now going to install bear boxes at our campgrounds. All right. I think it's a little premature. All right. So if there's nothing else from my colleagues or staff, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you very much. A wonderful meeting. Thanks. Wonderful presentations. Appreciate it.